Hello again, listeners. Welcome back to Tales in the Dark. I hope you have enjoyed my previous video and have excitedly anticipated the next one. Well, the wait is over. Welcome to today's Tale 1, The Night Walker. This is a story experienced by my family in one of our old houses in Dubai, back in the early 1990s. This was a one-story villa with a lot of empty land surrounding it and big, dense trees at the back. It was basically a forest and could creep out anyone at night. Trees that could appear terrifying in the dead of the night if one was walking alone, or even if you are walking with one person. One night at approximately 1 a.m., my brother, who was 13 at the time, was reading a book in bed when he heard a creaking under his bed. He looks over at our other brother, age 9, who was asleep next to him on the other bed to see if he heard it. But the little one was fast asleep. Thinking he was hearing things, he went back to his Star Wars book. A few minutes later, he hears it again, this time louder. Startled, he brings up the courage to force himself to look under the bed. Nothing there. Puzzled, he comes back up to get settled on his pillows once again when he stops dead. His heart stops as he looks at the space next to him on the bed. It had a very familiar looking dent, as if something was sitting there putting weight in that spot. Then, right before his very eyes, the dent slowly disappeared, as if the weight had been lifted, and slowly he felt as if somebody was walking on the bed with the weight going up and down with every step. The thing walked down to the foot of the bed and then jumped off. My brother had held his breath while he watched this whole scene and stayed frozen for a few minutes further, even after it was over. Then finally snapping out of it, he found his feet and lungs and ran out of the room to our parents, screaming the whole way and waking up the entire house. My parents brushed it off at the moment, so as not to scare him further, and explained it away as an act of imagination, as most parents do. But what happened 1 month later changed their minds. 1 month later, this was a time when my entire family had gone on holiday and left our live-in nanny behind to look after the house. It was a large villa, and she was in her room late at night, writing letters for sending back home to her family in Sri Lanka. In the middle of this activity, she feels spine-tingling fear. She looks up and around her room, but obviously there's nothing there. But she feels the hair on the back of her neck standing on edge. She brushes it off and looks back down at her writing and continues. Then she hears a slight thud at her door. She looks at the bedroom door, but nothing. Again, she feels the hair on the back of her neck stand up. But once again, she goes back to her activity. Then, while writing, she feels the mattress on her bed go down with weight, just like my brother did. And as she turns to look at the spot with confusion, it starts moving forward as if steps are being taken. She freezes with horror for a few minutes, then finds the courage to get up and run out of the house to the back where the family driver lived in the room in the garden. She banged on his door and begged him to stay the night at the house. He laughed and did not believe her, but her hysterical state convinced him that he should stay in the house, else she would get sick with fear. When she joined us on our holiday a few days later, she told my parents about this incident, and that terrified them. They finally believed my brother and his encounter to be true, for she could not be relaying the same thing because she was never told about what happened to my brother. She had no idea that this had happened before, and yet she experienced the same thing. Tale 2. The Childlike Creature. This was in that same house, the one-story villa in Dubai. My mother had the habit of walking around the big trees in our backyard late at night, the same trees that I had mentioned were terrifying. Well, it didn't terrify her, not in the beginning. According to our belief in jinn, it's not advisable to be walking around in trees late at night, as it is known that that is where the jinn live and are especially active at night. As usual, she was walking around through the trees at around 1 a.m. one night when she stopped short in front of a large, especially monstrous-looking tree. As she watched, she felt the branches to be curling into claw-like hands. Obviously, that was ridiculous, so she brushed it off. She continued looking around the tree and then stopped short at the trunk, where she saw a pair of red, glowing eyes looking at her, staring right back at her through within the trunk. She felt her blood turn to ice. She tried to move, but couldn't. She could feel as if the creature was speaking to her telepathically, asking her to stay forever in the tree. Few minutes later, she finally felt like she could run, and she turned around and fled back to the house. But she could still feel those eyes following her as she left. She never told this to anyone, but that night, as she was asleep, she got her first nightmare. She screamed in her sleep and thrashed around. She was woken by my dad. She still did not tell him what had happened. She just ignored it as a nightmare, and he was willing to comply as he wanted to go back to sleep. But again, the next night, the same thing happened, and the night after that too. This continued for a week. Then, a week later, she was once again screaming in her sleep, but this time, she was yelling out for her dad. On this night, my dad was awoken by the noise once again. This time, he slept on his side facing away from her, and there was a wardrobe mirror right in front of him. As he opened his eyes and looked in the mirror, he gasped. In the reflection, he saw a small, childlike creature standing over my mom. Its skin was burnt and veiny, but red all over with no hair and claws at the ends of its hands. It had a hand on my mom and was smirking as she screamed and convulsed. As my father stared, the creature glanced up to catch him staring through the mirror, and its glowing red eyes flashed with anger. As my dad quickly turned around, nothing was there. He then finally found his wits and shook my mom awake once again. The next day he nailed an Ayatul Kursi, which is a powerful verse from the Quran, on the wall above her head, and insisted she read it 3 times before going to bed every day, and he did the same. She and all of us kids were also not permitted to go in the garden after dark anymore. Thankfully, after that, she stopped screaming at night. But the image of that creature was forever seared in his mind.